Well, hello there. So in this video, we're going to be doing a free response practice problem. And so, of course, these are optional, but hopefully they can help you kind of conceptualize how to approach the free response exam a little bit. So this is actually adapted from an AP test from a few years ago. And I've skipped the parts that we haven't learned how to do yet. But in fact, I just kind of point out that actually this is a big chunk of the problem that just from this unit, right, just this short bit into the class, we already can do almost this whole problem. So let's start here. Assume the US economy is below full employment. Now, what does that mean? Below full employment. It means we're in a recession. And so remember that the economy can be in one of three places, right? Recession, expansion, and equilibrium. So draw a correctly labeled graph of LRAS, SRAS, aggregate demand, and show each of the following. So that's not going to be too bad. And then label current and full employment. So we'll start here. So start here, and we've got Y. You could also, of course, write GDPR down here as well. PL and LRAS and YF. And if you're wondering why are these pages lined, right? It's kind of a pain. The AP tests, when they're done in person, they actually have lined paper as well. So you have to draw them online. It's awkward, but get used to that a little bit is why I do that. So we're below, so our point here is going to be to the left of full employment, right? It's going to be over here because below full employment means literally you're below the current capacity of the economy. And we label PL1 as kind of that dot. Now it says policymakers pursue fiscal rather than monetary. So that's the part we didn't learn about yet. Assume the marginal propensity to consume is 0.8 and the gap is 300, right? So that's kind of an important detail for part D that we need to solve. And it says if the government changes its spending without changing taxes to eliminate the gap, calculate the minimum required change in spending. So if we know the gap is 300, then the spending multiplier times the change in G is what we're going for here. And we're looking for that value because we're going to be able to calculate the spending multiplier. We know MPC is given to us as 0.8, so MPS has to be 0.2, so the spending multiplier is 1 over 0.2, which is 5. So 300 equals 5 times the change in government spending. So the change in government spending has to be positive 60, at least, right? Or else it won't be enough. Now, part 2 says if the government changes taxes, will the required amount, the change in taxes, be larger, smaller, or equal to the minimum change in spending? Explain. So you could go through and like resolve this using the tax multiplier and find that you would need a 75 billion or whatever it is, 75 change in taxes in order to accomplish the same goal. And if you want, you can resolve it. But ultimately, the change in taxes has to be equal to lowering it by 75 because, right? And so it's larger. If you want to answer this question, it's probably best to say larger change because the tax multiplier is smaller than the spending multiplier, right? And so if you kind of know that fact, then you know they're going to have to change taxes by a larger amount than they're going to have to change spending to accomplish the same goal. So they would have to cut taxes by 75. It's a larger change in the government spending because the tax multiplier is smaller. Okay, the last part of this question says, assume they lower income taxes, and they do that. Will each of the following increase, decrease, stay the same? Aggregate demand, explain. LRAS, explain. So if they change income taxes, right, and they close the recessionary gap, well, then that we aren't asked to graph it, but I'll show you, right? They close the gap, AD2, everything's hunky-dory, we go back to the equilibrium. So we'd say E1 AD increases because lowering taxes, therefore increasing consumption. And we know that consumption is part of aggregate demand, right? Which is included in aggregate demand. And so that's a good enough answer for the first one. With the second one, well, we didn't change anything related to aggregate supply, right? Remember that the aggregate supply shifters are IRAP, inflationary expectations, resource costs, actions by the government affecting producers, and productivity. So you might argue, well, that the price levels went up. And so therefore inflationary expectations would rise. You could argue that, but realistically, we don't know that that's necessarily going to happen, right? That's number one. We can't assume that something happens like that. If you did and you went through that process, the other issue with saying inflationary expectations are going to create problems is that those don't exist in the long run. So inflationary expectations don't ever mess with the long run. It is possible that you could get to an answer where you said, well, resource costs are higher because price levels rose, resource costs are higher, and therefore aggregate supply won't grow as fast. But realistically, the best answer is no change, because no change to inflationary expectations, right? Resource costs, et cetera, right? Like no change to aggregate supply is the correct answer for this problem. And I doubt that even if you reasoned it out and argued, well, the resource costs are going to be higher, the AP probably wouldn't give you credit for that, because you can't assume that those two things are connected to each other. You're going to really want to follow where the breadcrumbs lead you. Okay, so hopefully this helped you. See you next time.